Nigerian President Bola Tinubu has affirmed his commitment to collaborating with the private sector, recognizing its pivotal role in the nation's economy. During a Ramadan fast-breaking gathering with business leaders at the Aso Rock Villa, Tinubu promised to fulfill his mandate and emphasized the importance of working closely with the private sector for economic transformation. State House correspondent Adesua Omorowa reports.
Amidst fine dining and humor.
When you're going to have dinner with Mr. President, you go and wear your best. This is my best.
President Bola Tinubu's Ramadan breaking of fast today sees a distinguished gathering of Nigeria's business elite, creating the perfect ambience for a feast of economic ideas.
There's no driver of this economy other than what you have. If the private sector is not flourishing, there's no growth, there's no prosperity, there's no employment. No matter how flowery the speeches are, it won't grow any mushroom.
Drawing from his visit to the New York Stock Exchange, President Tinubu echoed his conviction that Nigeria can drive economic transformation from within.
We only want you to show your face as a diversified and understanding, bold investors. Not we cannot do it ourselves. I said, we can do it. Nigeria is a self-believer and can always deliver on its own. Whatever, they call us in the past, we know our first name and our last name. Our first name is Spirit, our last name is Kandu.
Tinubu's words weren't just food for thought. They were a call to action, urging collaboration.
You voluntarily elected me. I campaigned for it. I got it. I have no excuse but perform. I can't complain. That is stressful. There are some countries that have failed. There are some countries that have succeeded. But in your time, in our time, in my time, all of us must work together to succeed.
On their part, Nigeria's business titans restated their commitment to supporting the administration's economic programs, offering a banquet of ideas and resources.
Mr. President, on behalf of the Nigerian private sector, we wish to assure you that we are 101% behind you.
Pharmaceutical industry in Nigeria can do better if supported. And we need to have a forum that we can say this is how we can be supported.
I'm encouraged by the few things that you have done since you assumed office, the signals that you have set, and the fact that you are communicating with your people. I mean, we had 8 years of where I thought there was a complete blank, no communication. Okay.
But it's not just about words. Actions speak volumes. Alan Oyema, Chief Executive Officer of Air Peace, emphasizes the importance of tangible results.
The ease of doing business is coming back gradually. I can attest to that. The leadership you appointed in aviation, I know what they did. I know what they did recently. When some civil servants decided to misbehave, they stood their ground and said, this will never happen again. Look at what the High Commission in the UK did. They spread a piece on screens all over London. Everybody felt belonged. You've proved that you are a Nigerian president. You're not a tribal president. To my brothers and sisters at the private sector, think of what you can do to support him. The only way you can support him is to go to your businesses and try to see how you can bring down the cost of your products When you do that, it trickles back to the government and people will continue to believe in the government. I've done my part. God bless you.
As the event concludes, there's a palpable sense of optimism and determination.
There was a lot of apprehension. They were not very happy and very uncertain. But the vibe we're getting right now in the room is totally different from what we got when we first started. The assurances that we've heard in this room is to be honest, very gladdening. And that shows the amount of work that Your Excellency you've done and the amount of belief that the community has in your vision.
Adesuwa Omorwan, Arise News.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined from our Lagos studio by Dr. Nnemeka Obiareri, who's a development economist and investment banking executive, and Mr. Victor Ndukauba, Deputy Managing Director, AfriInvest West Africa. Welcome, gentlemen. Nice to have you in our Lagos studio. So, Mr. Ndukauba, let me start with you. You have worked for 19 years at AfriInvest, and so I would assume that you quite understand and know the Nigerian economy very well. If you were to describe the economy as it is today in one sentence, how would that be? Or what would you say?
Okay, thank you. The question you asked was if I could describe the Nigerian economy in one sentence, and I said the word for me would be resilient. I think the Nigerian economy is one that continues to demonstrate remarkable resilience in the face of severely daunting economic odds. I think, without having to rehash a lot of the negatives, but, there have been a lot of challenges facing Nigerians and the economy on several fronts, including galloping inflation, the escalating exchange rate and what it means for cost of doing business and all of that. And then if you layer on some of the challenges around talent migration, or what is locally known as JAPA, it also has impacted, access to talent in order to make jobs effective. I think that is how I would describe the economy.
Yes, thank you. So let's go to Mr. Obiareri. I hope I'm pronouncing it very well. So, I mean, like he has mentioned, there are a couple of problems or issues that we have in the economy. There's inadequate infrastructure. There are obstacles to investment, lack of confidence in the currency, limited foreign exchange capacity, tariff and non-tariff barriers to trade. It's a lot. And so where do we start with in trying to deal with each and every one of these items? And what can we work on quickly, in your view?
Most of the issues you mentioned and proclaimed as challenges are symptomatic manifestations that does not address the root cause of the problems. I've always said it, Nigeria is a country that ticks the right boxes to become one of the top 10 biggest economies in the whole world within the next 10 years if we fix the foundational issues. High inflation rates, insecurity, corruption, all that we have listed as the problems of Nigeria are symptoms of the root problem, which is the physical deformities, the constitutional deformities that we need to fix. At the root of our problem are two twin demons, the demons of corruption and the demons of insecurity. And these demons are offsprings of those constitutional and physical deformities that we need to fix. I say it to anybody who cares to listen. Nigeria is one country that is so blessed by God. We have the best of natural resources that God has endowed mankind with. We have the most resilient human beings that live on planet Earth. All that we have lacked over the last 24 years is the right leadership to spur and release the latent potentials in this country. And just like Mr. President said when he invited the private sector to breakfast with him, and I've always said it, what we owe ourselves in this country is the truth and nothing but the truth. The truth you know and proclaim and execute will set you free and set you free abundantly. The private sector has the best role to play in fixing Nigeria. And by fixing Nigeria, we must be very honest and upfront with Mr. President. Time will not permit us, like I said, across the whole sectors of Nigeria, we can build an economy that can easily produce everything we consume here and export nothing less than $200 billion worth of goods and services, both oil and non-oil. We did it between 1960 to 1966. We can do it again, but we need to fix the foundation. And what are the fundamental problems? We need to fix the constitutional, the physical, the institutional, and the governance deformities that we currently have. The foundation is faulty, and if the foundation is not fixed, even if you bring an angel to govern this country, it will still stumble and fumble. So when Mr. President asked the private sector to support, what he practically is saying is that look me in the eyes, tell me the truth, provide the template, provide the guide, set the pace, and I will follow. And I've always said it, the role of government is to provide policies, to provide program directions. And to provide policy and program directions, the private sector must be very upfront and honest. We must put Nigeria before our selfish and private interests.
Okay.
And when we do this, this country will become a prosperous country for each and every one of us.
Okay, Mr. Antukoba, so he has mentioned some valid points, or he has made some valid points. He talked about the little issues we have here and there, and also right leadership. Do you believe that we have the right leadership today in order to solve some of those problems? I mean, the government has also taken some steps, so like the CBN, raising the interest rate and a couple of other things. Are they in the right direction?
Thank you for that question. I think the current administration has demonstrated to a large degree a commitment to righting the ship of state. You did mention just now the central bank, and I would say that some of the recent reforms within the central bank are geared towards essentially restoring direction to what was essentially a ship that was headed to the rocks. But I must also say that be those changes as they may, and I'm talking about some of the recent reforms to FX, some of the changes to the bank policy rate that is basically aimed at bringing down inflation, those monetary measures are essentially a short-term fix. My co-panelist has said that there has to be several, things to be done. I think on the fiscal side, there needs to be support for the work the central bank is doing to ensure that these changes and the progress we are all anticipating or hoping for essentially becomes sustainable. I'll start with on the revenue side, we'll look at oil output. So some of the challenges around output, which stems from both a lack of investment over the years as well as criminal activities around theft and brigandage, need to be frontally addressed. On the cost side, we've got to look at our costs again. Now, some of those changes that are required there are essentially hard-coded by the Constitution. So when we talk about things, for example, like governance and the structure of governance, there isn't any silver bullet or a single paintbrush that the executive can just, swing that would ultimately cure all. But I think there has to be some effort to demonstrate commitment and a resolution by the administration to show that, look, not only are we committed to fixing the economy, we are also going to lead from the front. I think those are some of the things we need to start seeing.
Okay, so from all you are saying, it means that the private sector, yes, is very important, as the president has said. However, a lot lies on the government. Mr. Obereri, I go back to you when you talk about the constitutional problems, the governance issues, the insecurity. These are major items to be dealt with. Do you have confidence that this is going to happen in this administration? Because in the last administration, the past 8 years, much of it wasn't touched, much of these items that we're discussing. Is this going to happen?
One of the reasons and one of the ways the government can rekindle confidence in the people is to provide through actions far-sweeping changes and reforms that will show the people that they really mean business and they want to have a departure from the past. When a team is not performing, when a club is not performing, and there's a new manager, there is a new coach, there's new leadership. If the old guard and old brigade have not performed, what you do is you sweepingly remove the old guard and you bring in new personnel and new structures to enable you succeed. The past 8 years has been one of the worst in the history of Nigeria. We are where we are today because of the level of impunity and brigandage that happened over the last 8 years. For the first time in the history of Nigeria, we are having, on an annual basis, loss of our crude oil resources to the tune of about $22 billion annually to thefts. For the first time in the history of Nigeria, we wasted $34 billion, 16 trillion naira, in failed turnaround maintenance programs and subsidy payments on over bloated consumption and import figures on subsidized petroleum products. For the first time in the history of Nigeria, Auditor General of Nigeria told us 107 million barrels of crude oil got lost, unaccounted for. One would have expected a government that preached rekindled hope. The first thing you will have done is when you come into the Ojas table that is thinking, you sweep away every of the members and the players of the old guard and then begin to rebuild. Like I said, Nigeria is a country that takes the right buses. I give you an example. 85 to 90% of our foreign exchange revenue comes from the oil and gas sector. 1970, Petrobras was bettered. What did the Brazilian government do? They discovered the fact that private sector efficiency will help them to build confidence. They divested their holding from Petrobras to 28.5% and brought in private sector investors. In a period of 50 years, they built a company that has assets of $174 billion, annual profit of $36 billion, revenue of $121 billion, compared to our NNPC that is struggling an asset base of about $58 to $60 billion. What the federal government of Nigeria should do, there should be a sweeping change. You cannot inherit a corrupt structure and you keep it. Let there be a sweeping institutional and personnel overhaul. Bring in transparency and the urgent needed transformation. Federal government as a matter of urgency, if we want to build trust in Nigeria, borrow leave from Petrobras and Aramco. Divest federal government shareholding in NNPC by 60%. That will unlock at least about $38 billion. Offer new issues, new shares. Let NNPC become truly a private company with private shareholding that is more than what the public sector owns, like the LLNG. If you do an offer for sale of 60% of your shares and do a new issue of, say, 40%, we will unlock into our federation account over $55 billion and bring in the needed private sector efficiency that will unlock $50 billion annual capital investment in that sector. And when you do this, people will know that we are serious. Let me tell you the truth. On the agro sector, we have potentials to unlock nothing less than $200 billion annually. Private sector should lead. We need reforms, constitutional, physical, institutional reforms. And Mr. President owe it to himself for promising us hope, and to the rest of Nigeria. I loved his speech today before the private sector. But he need to go all the hog. I keep on asking this question. This is the first time in the history of Nigeria that we had oil prices going to $90 per barrel, and yet we are hemorrhaging. It never happened. We used to have output of 2.5 million barrels in 2010, 2011, and 2012. What happened to those outputs? Let there be a total cleansing. From the Petroleum Ministry to the NNPC to the NNAPRA, all the old gas that were there under the Buhari regime should not have any business under the Tinubu regime.
Right.
Bring in new frontiers, new persons, new structures, and let us rebuild this economy. You cannot continue to struggle with the old guard who was part of the problems over the last 8 years.
Yes, very good point. Great points. Ms. Andekauba, he has mentioned something that is very important: stolen oil and other types of fraud going on or has been going on in Nigeria. And he says we need sweeping change. A lot of people will agree with him. In your view, does this government have the credibility to go through with that change?
I think if there's anything the Bola Tinubu administration has demonstrated since inception, is the fact that there is courage to take hard decisions. I think even if we're just all reeling from the announcements on tariff adjustments, we are all evidently, visible to some of the things that have happened regarding changes in the petroleum sector, for example, the devaluation that happened there, the devaluation of the currency. So I think if there's any administration that had the capacity to take those hard decisions, it is the Bola Tinubu-led administration. And I think, with all respect to that, to the government, I believe that whatever changes are required there has been demonstrated courage to do what needs to be done. What obviously, in my view, should happen is, first of all, an assessment of where exactly we are. There are very fundamental questions that Dr. Berry has asked around, for example, output, going back to as recently as 2014, 10 years ago, and how the output has cratered quite tremendously. What exactly happened? Is it a combination or example of a disinvestment into the oil industry? Or can we perhaps look at oil theft? And to what degree? How much of the decline in output is as a result of oil theft? What is the nature of the theft? What can we do to essentially, stop the leakages and restore confidence? I believe the administration has the capacity to take the right decisions, but those actions are essentially left to be seen.
Mr. Bereri, let's go back to sometime last year when the president, I think it was in October, he talked about a Nigerian economy that can be about $1 trillion by 2026 and $3 trillion by the end of a decade. Do you see that happening? Is that possible? And if it occurs, what does that even look like? What are the characteristics of such an economy?
Yes, it's very, very possible. When Mr. President mentioned that we can build a $1 trillion economy, we can actually build a $2 trillion economy within the next 10, 15 years. I want us to look back to history. As at 1965, Nigeria was way ahead of South Korea, way ahead of Singapore, way ahead of Indonesia. Today, the South Korean economy is about $1.6 trillion size, and we have the potentials to surpass them. And that is where the private sector comes in, and that is where leadership comes to play. I give you an example. Look at Abia State. They have a new governor who is very focused, Dr. Alex. I'm from Imo, I'm not from Abia State, so I'm not trying to blow the trumpet of a governor who is not my governor, but I can give you an example of what the man is doing. Today, he appointed mayors who are not like the ordinary local government chairmen, accomplished men from the private sector. Some of them accomplished in their private sector roles before appointing them as mayors. As I'm talking to you today, there are a lot of private sector investments going into Abia State, which I know. As I'm talking to you, there are a group of investors that are already planning within the next 1 year to do about 5,000 greenhouse farm estates in Abia State that can give about $64 billion revenue within the next 1 year. As I'm talking to you, there are private sector investments that are going into Abia State to set up cocoa plantations, 30 hectares in each of the 184 electoral wards. Private sector led, that will unlock over 69 billion naira annually into Abia economy within the next 3 years. As I'm talking to you, there are some group of investors who are already planning to set up an MSME finance bank to the tune of about $5 million. This is something I know. I'm not from Abia State, but I'm telling you the buzz and the kind of things because there is leadership in place, an inspired leader who is willing to provide security, provide guidelines. And this thing can be replicated across the systems. There is this fixation with the federal government of Nigeria. We need to look at the state governors and tax them. There is no state in Nigeria that cannot build, honestly, a $1 billion revenue economy every year. There is no state in Nigeria that cannot build up their GDP to about $30 billion if they look inward. But the truth is, and we want to play with the governors beyond the presidency, ask for help. Nobody knows it all. In the Bible, we saw a Pharaoh who did not remember even his own dream. He sought for help from a 30-year-old Hebrew boy who not only told him his vision, his manifesto, but helped him to interpret and execute it. In Babylon, we saw a mighty king who sought for the wisdom of 5 young men, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they built great empires. The governor should look beyond the fact and jackal location and seek help. Nigeria is so blessed with the best of human capital that can help us grow this economy. We can fix the insecurity, we can fix it, but within the short term, if a governor seeks help, there are helps available. I was privileged in 2019 to speak at the PDP Governors Forum. In the North alone, from the date palm plantation, they can unlock an economy that can give them $12.5 billion revenue over the next 50 years annually by 2029. These things are not skyrocket science. Netherlands with a landmass of 41,000 square kilometers, 14,000 square kilometers of land, arable land, is doing almost about $110 billion revenue from agro exports. Nigeria can do times 2 of that.
Okay.
But we need to be very honest with ourselves. We need to seek help and seek good counsels. Ms.
Andikaoba, so it's a good way, a good place to talk about investment. We need investment to have all of this thing happen in Nigeria. A lot of people talk about foreign investment. You know, every government sings about foreign investment, but the local investment is as important as well. Don't you think so? Briefly.
In fact, with all sense of responsibility, the answer is yes. We often talk about foreign investment, and the truth is it is important to have foreign investment. But what always leads foreign investment is local investment. The foreign investors cannot come into your economy and cast their dollars blindly or cast their net blindly. They need to be led, and they are usually led by local partners, local investors who show the direction as to how and where they see the opportunities. I think that the aspirations that the Bola Tinubu administration has set by tabling this ambition of $1 trillion economy in 2 years, or a $3 trillion economy by 2030, is one that, with all due respect, is rather ambitious. But sometimes you need to shoot for the moon. Shoot for something really out of your range so that you can achieve something truly remarkable. We can actually drive local investments into local areas of expertise and value creation. I think one of the areas, and my co-panelists have spoken very clearly about this, is getting the sub-nationals to begin to imagine and envision an economy that is not dependent on revenue allocation and sharing. By looking at some of the local areas of value expertise, looking at the areas where there's significant resource blessings and ambience and overages or excesses, as it were, they can begin to tap into that. So between agriculture, local manufacturing, looking at areas of, looking at their human capital, and taking deliberate efforts to envision and create the enabling environment to attract initially domestic capital from within their local, domestic areas, and then from further afield in the country. You can then begin to see the foreign investors who would essentially follow those local investors to then also co-invest in those areas, from agriculture to mining to housing and so many other areas. I think one of the things that clearly we need to see, however, is infrastructure investment. We have to begin to unlock infrastructure. It is one area that presents what I like to call a structural impediment to growth. Whatever it is we want to produce, whatever economic activity you want to see, there are certain critical infrastructure that are required to enable those. From transport infrastructure to power infrastructure, we have to begin to think big and creatively. Thankfully, we've seen some reforms, for example, to the laws that essentially govern how power is generated and sold and distributed in the country. That law has now essentially created room for states to also, in addition to whatever the federal government is doing, attract investment into electricity generation and distribution, at least at the captive or embedded level. And I think that is something we have to begin to see as well, because power is a critical element of productive activities.
Gentlemen, thank you for joining us.